soul, to Nocturne Lore. Breathe with me now. Let the weight of the day fall from your shoulders. You are safe here in the quiet between heartbeats. Tonight, we drift together into the deep past. I often wonder where in this broken galaxy of Necromunda or worlds far beyond. If you wish, leave a word in the comments below. Fey your city, your world, your corner of the night. I will read them all and know you are not alone in the darkness. Close your eyes now. The story begins younger, when the Imperium still believed in endings that did not bleed. I am a remembrancer, uncounted by time, and I stood upon Cadia when it still believed itself eternal. Even now, as my voice thins with age and sorrow, I feel that planet breathe again when Cadia never learned. Not because it was weak, but because it was too strong to be told. Beneath its fortress plains lay truths, sealed not against chaos, but against hope itself. The Imperium taught its children that Cadia stood. Because it could never fall, different certainty slept. One that said Cadia endured only because it was destined to break. Hold that thought gently. Do not chase it. Let it drift beside you like distant bells in fog. Curiosity is softest when it does not demand answers. Before ruin, there was order. Dawn without hesitation, a pale gold light slipping through iron clouds, touching battlements worn smooth by centuries of hands. The morning bells rang not in alarm, but in greeting, a low measured toll that spread across cassers and hives alike. It told every soul the same thing already. Boots struck stone in unison, not hurried, not harsh. A cadence practiced until it became comfort. Children heard it from their cradles. Veterans heard it in their dreams. March, breathe, stand, exhale. The Cadia ever learned to speak. Faintly live lashed like fortresses, Pinctuses, homes built into walls, streets aligned with firing lanes. Eat laughter still found room to echo. Quiet laughter, disciplined laughter. Ash and prayer. Lanterns were lit one by one. Small suns against the encroaching dark. They did not ward off fear. They reminded fear it was unwelcome. Cadia did not boast. It did not need to. Every soul carried the same creed without speaking it. Eyes now. Let that certainty settle like a warm weight on your chest. The long night is kind. I walked among them unseen, a quiet witness with too many memories. I listened to instructors teach history like litany. 13 black crusades, broken, repelled, endured. Names spoken. Adamantium, despoiler, a distant storm that always passed. No one asked if the storm could change. Why would they? It never had. Perfection repeated long enough becomes a lullaby. And lullabies invite sleep. Sometimes when the wind came in from the eye, it long, a pressure behind the eyes. The pylons beneath the crust hummed softly, then not loud enough to alarm, only enough to unsettle the soil and the soul. Children dreamed of doors they could not open, of stars blinking out one by one, astropaths woke trembling, hands bleeding from clenched. These reports were logged, classified, sealed, because Cadia must never doubt. The Imperium did not lie to Cadia. It simply chose which truths were allowed to breathe. Rain fell often, fine, metallic, patient. It tapped against armor and adamantium like sound. It meant the world still lived, still endured the pressure of the war pressing against its skin. I remember standing upon the highest wall of Kasrakrav, watching that rain blur the distant stars. The eye of terror pulsed softly beyond the horizon, not roaring. Moment, just a moment. I wondered if Cadia was not a shield, but a wound that refused to close. That thought felt dangerous, so I exhaled it into the wind. Do the same now. Feel your breath slow. You are drifting. Drifting. The planet seemed to sigh. Soldiers removed helmets and spoke quietly of nothing important. Food, weather, duty rosters. No one spoke of endings, because Cadia had never ended. In sealed chambers far below, ancient mechanisms whispered in dead tongues, understood what it feared. Their purpose remembered by only a handful, and even those memories were fragmented. Deliberately, I read those fragments once, a prophecy written without metaphor, without comfort. It spoke of a gate that must break to remain closed for all who followed. If you listen closely now, beneath my voice, you may hear it, the soft echo of marching boots, the distant tolling of bells, the wind moving over walls that believed themselves eternal. This is how Cadia wished to be remembered, in the quiet pride of eternal vigilance. And perhaps that is how it truly survives. In memory, in ritual, in the long night between battles. Rest here a while longer. Let the world remain unbroken tomorrow. Tomorrow, the shadow. Not stir. The rhythm has not changed, only deepened. Breathe with me once more, slow, patient. You are still safe in the quiet between heartbeats. When I think of Cadia's final age of peace, I do not remember banners or salutes, for remember stillness, endless vigilance, a stillness that settles only when every soul believes its watch will never end. Cadia did not sleep easily, but it slept without fear. At night, the caissons glowed faintly beneath the low and steady, their amber halos touching stone and steel with gentle familiarity. They marked paths walked 1,000,000 times before, paths that led nowhere unexpected. That predictability was comfort, a balm against the eye's ceaseless whisper. I would walk those paths softened, when boots were still, when bells rested, when only the wind spoke. The wind over Cadia was never wild. It moved like a disciplined thing, guided by walls and towers and gunmetal spines. It carried scents of oil, parchment, old incense soaked deep into. Sometimes I felt the planet listening back, deep below my feet, beneath fortress and hive, beneath bone and bedrock. The ancient pylons sang their silent hymn, a song no human ear was meant to hear, yet every Cadian soul felt its echo. They called it resilience, called it what it truly was. Attention held too long. Children trained almost as soon as they could walk. Not harshly, not cruelly. Training was simply part of living. Like breathing, like eating, like standing straight beneath a sky that never quite trusted you. Arithmetic, battle history beside scripture. There was no resentment in this, only acceptance. I watched a young girl once, barely old enough to speak in full sentences, holding a practice rifle too large for her frame. Her hands trembled, not from fear. Beside her, adjusted her grip, said nothing else. That silence taught more than words ever could. Cadia raised its children the way it raised its walls, layer by layer, without apology. In the academies, I listened as scholars spoke of fate without ever naming it. The preparedness of statistical inevitability, but never of endings. Ending was a word reserved for heresy. There were records sealed beneath seals, predictions made by minds long burned out by the warp. They spoke of convergence, of a moment when 13 failures would no longer be enough. The records were not destroyed, they were buried, and Cadia stood upon them like a grave that pretended it was bedrock. Sometimes, very rarely, a tech adept would pause beside a cogitator too long, eyes lingering on a data slate as if it breathed. Those adepts were reassigned, explained. Cadia did not erase its doubts, it relocated them. I felt the dissonance most strongly at dawn, when certainty was loudest. Morning drills echoed across the plains, thousands of boots striking in perfect cadence, a sound so steady it lulled the soul. You could close your eyes. Many did. I watched veterans march with expressions of calm devotion. They had fought horrors beyond counting, yet here they felt untouchable, as if Cadia itself stood between them and mortality. That belief was not arrogance, it was inheritance. Cadia had never known defeat, and so it could not imagine one beyond the walls. The eye of terror watched. It did not roar, it did not rage, it pulsed, slow, patient, like a wound that learned to wait. Astropaths felt it most keenly. Their dreams grew heavier, crowded with symbols. They pretended not to recognize names spoken without sound. Those astropaths were commended for endurance. Their visions logged as noise, because Cadia had stood against worse, had it not. The Imperium trusted precedent more than prophecy, and Cadia was precedent made stone. I remember a night of rare quiet. I dimmed slightly, as if holding its breath. I stood alone atop the wall, lantern light flickering softly at my back. Into thirst time, Cadia felt tired. Not weak, never weak. Been hidden. Cadia was not invincible. It was necessary, and necessity always ends. That truth settled in me like ash, soft, inevitable. I said nothing, because some truths, when spoken too early, become the cause of their own fulfillment. Eccentric disciplined grace, festivals were subdued, marked by additional drills, extra prayers. Candles burned not for celebration, but remembrance of battles not yet fought. The people found joy in readiness, in the knowledge that they were enough. And beneath the hymns and histories, the ancient mechanisms whispered louder, their song tightening, like a string drawn slowly back. No one noticed, because the melody never changed, only the tension. If you listen now, as sleep draws closer, you may feel it too. Awareness. You are drifting through a moment that cannot last, but does not yet know it. This was Cadia in its final calm. The breath held before the plunge, the watch kept before the horn sounded. Tomorrow, something ancient will stir, but not yet. Rest bells, sleep. The night remembers. The galaxy sleeps. Close your eyes. The long night is kind. Do not wake, weary soul. The rhythm continues, only slower, only deeper. Breathe with me again, in out. You are changed. And yet, something shifted. It was not announced. No bell rang out of sequence. No alarm disturbed the drills. The sky did not darken. The eye did not flare. Change arrived the way rust arrives. Silently, patiently, inevitably. I noticed it first in the breaths. Between the tolls of the bells, the pauses grew heavier, as if the planet itself hesitated. Cadian commanders began to linger longer over tactical maps, not because threats had increased, but because certainty had thinned. They spoke in the same measured tones, issued the same precise orders, yet their hands rested more firmly on the table edges, as if grounding themselves against an unseen pull. No one commented on it. To do so would invite doubt, and doubt was the only heresy Cadia truly feared. In the Scala halls, lectures on past Black Crusades took on us less like lessons, more like prayers, repeated to ensure their truth. Cadia had always endured, and repetition was how endurance stayed real. The pylons sang more often then, not louder, but with a persistence that seeped into dreams. Some nights, the ground vibrated just enough beneath bedrock, too gentle to alarm, too regular to ignore. Tech priests attributed it to calibration cycles, planetary tides, warp pressure fluctuations, well within tolerance. Everything was always within tolerance on Cadia, yet off pattern. Auspex readings returned flawless data that somehow felt incomplete. Perfection can be unsettling when it arrives too easily. I began to hear questions spoken without words. They came from soldiers standing watch at night, from medici tending minor wounds with unusual care, parents watching their children sleep a moment longer than required. The questions had no shape, no language, only a sense of anticipation. Not fear, never fear, expectation. As if something long delayed had finally begun to move. In the deepest vaults, cogitators reactivated without command. Their screens glowed faintly in the dark, displaying fragments of equations no living mind fully understood. Probability curves bending toward convergence, timelines narrowing. Servitors recorded the data, flagged it, and routed it upward through channels designed to vanish. Those channels functioned perfectly, The Imperium had engineered forgetting into Cadia's foundations, not as cruelty, but as mercy. Because some knowledge does not strengthen the wall, it only tells the wall it will someday crack. I visited a chapel carved into the inner wall of a castle. Candles burned low, their flames steady, untroubled by wind. A chaplain knelt alone, helmet resting beside him, hands clasped, eyes closed. He was not praying for victory. He was praying for continuity, for the day to resemble the one before it, the boots to strike stone in perfect cadence. Continuity is the quietest form of hope. I stood behind him, listening, and felt the weight of 10,000 years press gently against my spine. Astropathic choirs reported increased interference, messages arriving intact that lingered after reception. Cold pressure, a taste of iron that no ration explained. Choir masters reassured them. The eye was restless, as it always was. Cadia had weathered worse. That phrase returned often then. Incomplete. I watched a veteran remove his armor. After watch, his movements slower than they once were, not from age, but from thought. He ran his fingers along a dent in the breastplate, a mark earned centuries ago, a reminder that even Cadia's sons could bleed, but with familiarity, as if greeting an old companion he had long pretended was not there. Mortality had always walked beside Cadia. It was simply very patient. The eye of terror pulsed more distinctly, then still distant, still contained, charted its fluctuations. Their instruments reported nothing outside accepted variance, and yet they recalibrated twice as often, not because the data demanded it, but because their instincts did. Cadia trained instinct as rigorously as marksmanship, and instinct whispered when numbers did not. There was a night when the bells did not ring, not because they failed, but because a commander ordered silence. No announcement followed, no explanation offered. The people noticed. Of course they noticed. Silence is loud on a world built from rhythm. Yet no one panicked. They stood, they listened. When the bells resumed the following dawn, the relief was subtle, almost ashamed. Cadia did not like to admit it needed reassurance. I began to understand then why the warnings had been buried, why the prophecies were sealed. Believe too completely. Belief that strong becomes inertia. Inertia resists change, even when change is survival. Cadia was perfect at standing still, and the galaxy was learning how to move around it. As sleep deepens now, let that thought drift gently past you. Do not hold it. You are safe here. In the moment before motion, this was the season of quiet tightening. The breath drawn before the cry, the pause before the final measure begins. Cadia still stood, unbroken, unbowed, and somewhere beyond the veil, something ancient had finished waiting, but not yet. Rest, breathe, drift. The night remembers. The galaxy sleeps. Close your eyes. The long night is kind. Do not rise, weary soul. The watch continues. The world still breathes. Breathe with me now. Slow, measured. You remain closer. not to strike, only to listen. Cadia entered such a moment without ceremony. Nothing fell, nothing burned, nothing screamed, and yet, across the fortress world, a subtle realignment began. Orders grew marginally more complex. Drills extended by minutes that were net rotations overlapped by a fraction too precise to be coincidence. Cadia was adjusting itself, the way a body tightens before impact. In command halls carved from ancient stone, strategic hololiths flickered with renewed attention. Not new threats, but old ones revisited. The circled again and again. No one spoke the reason aloud, but everyone felt it. Patterns do not repeat forever. They culminate. Cadia's commanders were not afraid of culmination. They were afraid of misalignment. Trusted Cadia, because Cadia never miscounted. I listened to Vox traffic during these days. Routine transmissions, status confirmations, boring by design, yet beneath the words, there was a tension, like a breath taken too shallow. Pilots requested at the edges of sanctioned space. Supply vessels arrived early, as if eager to be gone. No alarms were raised, no alerts issued. Cadia did not react. It prepared. In the Scala, students memorized casualty figures from wars they had not yet fought. Sacrifice as inevitability, not tragedy. That distinction mattered. Cadia did not romanticize death. It normalized it. When death becomes routine, the extraordinary becomes absence. There was a shift in the sky. Then, so subtle even augurs struggled to rearrangement of the familiar navigators. Passing near the Cadian gate reported a sensation of narrowing, as if space itself had drawn its shoulders inward. These reports were filed, acknowledged, and set aside. The Imperium trusted Cadia's pylons, trusted before anyone remembered how they were built, and so they would continue. I walked once more to the deepest accessible level of the fortress, beneath Casersonen. The air was colder there, still heavy with dust undisturbed for centuries. Ancient seals pulsed faintly, responding to forces they alone recognized. I placed my hand against the stone and felt it tremble. Not violently, not urgently, wearily, like an old sentinel shifting weight after too long at post. There are limits to endurance, even sacred ones. Cadia had borne the eye's gaze, cheered defiance. But defiance requires renewal, and renewal requires release. The pylons were not infinite. They were precise. They had been tuned for a moment, a convergence, a sacrifice, measured not in lives, but in worlds. That truth lay buried beneath, hidden from love, because to know it would have broken Cadia long before chaos ever could. I remember a mother watching her child march in a youth formation. The child's steps imperfect, yet earnest. The mother smiled, pride tempered with something else. Child was, but what the child would be asked to become. Cadia did not teach innocence. It taught readiness to surrender it. That lesson passed silently from glance to glance, from generation to generation. There came a day when the bells rang slightly earlier than scheduled. To be felt, not enough to be proven, the sound carried across the casters with familiar solemnity, yet something in its echo lingered longer than it should have. People paused, not stopping, just listening. Then the rhythm resumed, and the moment passed. Patiently, I reviewed sealed text then, fragments permitted only to those already burdened by too much knowing. They spoke of a lock built to fail, of a gate held shut by pressure. Not strength, pressure must be released eventually, or the structure containing it shatters. Cadia had been both lock and pressure for 10,000 years. No wonder the ground ached. The eye pulsed brighter then, not flaring, focusing its storms aligned, its tides synchronized. Something vast beyond comprehension had turned its attention fully upon the Cadian gate, not in hatred, but in certainty. Schedule long overdue. Astropaths felt the weight intensify. Their choirs strained, yet held. Cadia demanded nothing less. As you drift now, let the tension ease from your chest. You are not the one who must stand watch. You are only remembering. Remained intact, yet leaned toward conclusion. Cadia still stood, magnificent, unyielding, and that was precisely why it would matter so much when it did not. But that knowledge lay just ahead, still mercifully distant. Rest here. Remembers. The galaxy sleeps. Close your eyes. The long night is kind. Do not wake. Weary soul. The watch deepens. The walls still hold. Breathe with me now. Slow. Even you remain in the quiet between heartbeats. There is a point in every vigil when attention turns inward. When the sentry no longer scans the horizon, Cadia reached that point gently, without alarm, without confession. The planet continued its rituals with flawless discipline, yet the meaning of those rituals began to shift. They were no longer only preparation. They were reassurance, not harsher, simply more exact. Uniforms were inspected twice, weapon rights extended by a measured fraction, prayers recited with a steadiness that bordered on devotion to the act itself. Cadia had always believed in form. Now I believed in it a little more, distant. I noticed it in the voices. First, orders were issued with the same words, the same cadence, but the pauses between phrases lengthened, as if speakers allowed themselves an extra breath, as if each command carried a private acknowledgement that commanders did not doubt their soldiers, they doubted the mercy of time. There were gatherings then, small, unannounced, not councils, conversations, senior officers standing together at observation boards, gazing toward the eye without speaking. Each had fought chaos, survived where others had not. What they shared in those moments was not fear. It was comprehension. The eye no longer felt distant. It felt attentive, like a presence leaning closer, listening for a weakness in the cadence of Cadia's breath. Imperceptibly. No proclamations, no banners, just a quiet increase, a sense that more was required, that the stores must be full, even if they were never emptied. Workers did not complain. They understood instinctively. Cadia did not hoard out of panic, never failed it before. I walked once through a barracks at rest, armor stacked with ceremonial precision. Soldiers slept lightly. Made dreams passed between them like low clouds, dreams of standing longer, of holding lines that did not exist, of skies that felt heavier than they looked. They would wake refreshed, ready, but the dreams lingered in the Scala archives, not the forbidden ones, just adjacent, close enough to feel their gravity. The request was denied with courtesy, and the historian accepted it without protest. That was the Cadia way. Yet that night, the historian dreamed of doors opening themselves, of pages turning without unsettled. Some knowledge finds its way through the smallest cracks. Astropathic choirs adjusted their harmonics, singing lower, slower. They described the warp as thickened, not violent, dense. Messages took longer to push through, as if reality itself required persuasion. Warning. Cadia did not believe in warnings, only confirmations. The eye had always been there. Therefore, its pressure was normal. I returned often to the pylons in my thoughts, those ancient sentinels beneath the crust. Agreements, forged between laws older than mankind. Their purpose was simple, hold, and they had held magnificently. But I sensed their effort more clearly now, a constant strain, like arms extended too long without rest. The pylons were not failing. They were working exactly as designed. The most troubling truth of all. One evening, a minor seismic tremor passed beneath Castle Myrak, barely registered, barely felt. Children paused in their lessons. Soldiers steadied themselves instinctively. Then life resumed. The tremor was explained as tectonic settling, a phrase so ended all conversation. But that night, I dreamed of locks shifting in their housings, of pressure redistributing itself, of inevitability adjusting its grip. There was kindness then, more than before, not sentimental, not indulgent. A hand on a shoulder, lingering a moment, fraction deeper, a shared silence, where once there might have been words. Cadians did not speak of love easily. They expressed it through presence. Presence became precious. I saw a commander watch his regiment march past, each face familiar, accountability. But for memory, as if committing them to something beyond record, he did not know why he did this. Only that it felt necessary. The eye of terror pulsed again, a little brighter, a little closer. Its storms aligned into patterns, long studied, long dismissed precisely. Astrologers adjusted charts, rechecked data, confirmed alignments that should not yet exist. The reports reached high command, were read, and set aside. Cadia did not fear patterns. It trusted them, as sleep draws you deeper. Now responsible for the wall. You are not asked to stand. You are only remembering a world that did. This was Cadia in the season of quiet resolve. when preparation turned inward, when certainty was reinforced rather than examined. The walls were stronger than ever. The regiments were singing their ancient song. And yet, somewhere beneath all that strength, a question waited patiently. What happens when endurance becomes the final offering? But that answer had not yet arrived. Rest now. Let the bells continue unbroken. Let the boots keep time. Do not remains unbroken. The walls still. Listen. Breathe with me again. Slow. Unforced. You are still held within the quiet between heartbeats. There comes a stage in every long watch when the sentry realizes he is no longer waiting for an enemy. He is waiting for confirmation without acknowledging it. The routines continued, but their purpose had subtly shifted. They were no longer only about readiness. They were about affirmation. Each drill repeated a question without words. Are we still enough? I noticed the change in the way officers studied the sky, scanned it as one scans terrain, methodically, without emotion. Now, their gaze lingered, not searching for movement, but measuring absence. The stars above Cadia looked the same, yet felt slightly farther away, as if the void had inhaled. Navigate. Routes that had once felt open now felt narrow, not blocked, constrained. Space itself seemed to remember where it had been wounded. The first subtle redeployments began. Then, not troop movements, not yet, tested twice, in the same cycle. No one announced these changes. They were framed as optimization. Cadia excelled at optimization. But optimization assumes a known future. And Cadia's future was beginning to blur. In the fortress chapels, attendance increased. Not dramatically felt. Soldiers knelt longer, heads bowed, hands resting against the cool stone as if listening for a pulse. Prayers were not louder. They were quieter, more internal. Not pleas, affirmations. We stand, we endure. Again to the restricted archives, to fragments most preferred to forget. There, in data slivers never meant to be assembled. A pattern emerged, not prophecy, not prediction, a design. Cadia was not placed before the eye by chance, nor merely by strategic reality. At a precise angle, under a pressure calculated across ages, keystones do not last forever. They hold until the structure above them is complete. Then they are removed or crushed. This truth had been known once, corrosive for faith, and so it was buried beneath discipline. A veteran sergeant once spoke to me without knowing why. We stood overlooking a training ground at dusk, the light fading into iron gray, he said. Calmly, it feels like the calm before a storm. Then he surprised him. Cadia did not believe in storms, only sieges, and yet the feeling lingered between us. The pylons responded more visibly now. Energy flows adjusted, resonances shifted, harmonics realigned. Tech priests recorded the changes with reverence, not degrading. They were compensating. Compensation implies imbalance. That word never appeared in the reports. Cadia did not acknowledge imbalance. It corrected it. Dreams grew heavier across the planet. Not nightmares, not visions, shared impressions. Walls unclosing doors, voices counting down without numbers. People woke rested, but thoughtful, as if they had participated in something important, and could not quite remember what it was. In the void beyond Cadia, something adjusted its posture. Warp tides aligned with unusual patience, reality to prepare itself. This was not rage, not hunger. It was inevitability. Abaddon had not yet appeared, but his shadow had begun to stretch, not across space, across time. The 13th mark grew heavier. In the minds of those who counted such things, felt it. I walked among civilians in the hives, their lives unchanged on the surface. Markets opened, children studied, workers reported on time. Yet there was a new tenderness in these routines. Parents watched their children a little longer before parting. Neighbors lingered in brief conversation, as if subconsciously storing moments. Cadia did not panic. It cherished. That was the quietest warning of all. A high-ranking tactician once asked a forbidden question. Not aloud, not officially. He wondered. Privately, endurance, as survival, as the enemy's failure to pass. But what if holding was no longer enough? That thought unsettled him, and so he buried it beneath revised contingency plans. Contingencies multiplied rapidly. Then layer upon layer, Cadia was building redundancy against the unnameable. The pulsed again, and this time the pylons answered. A resonance passed through the planet, felt in bones, in stone, in memory, not pain, communication. Two ancient systems acknowledging one another, the gate and the lock. I understood. Knowledge forward, beyond the breaking point. Because when Cadia fell, it would not truly vanish. It would become a story, a warning, a vow inherited by a fractured imperium. Stories endure where walls cannot. As you drift deeper now, let the tension soften. This is still the breaks. The drills continue. The bells ring on time. The pylons hold. Cadia still stands, but the galaxy has begun to lean. Rest here, in the narrowing moment. Before the name Abaddon is spoken with urgency, do not wake, weary soul. The vigil draws inward. The walls still breathe. Breathe now, slow, measured. You remain within the quiet between heartbeats. There is a threshold every fortress reaches, a point where readiness becomes anticipation, and anticipation becomes recognition. Cadia crossed that threshold, without fanfare. No banners were raised. Planet simply listened more carefully to itself. Silence became informative. The first official alerts were mundane. Routine elevation of readiness states. Marginal increases. Barely worth recording. Cadia lived permanently near readiness. So the shift felt natural. Like monitor and observe quietly became maintain continuous awareness. Watchfulness turned inward, as if Cadia were checking its own pulse. I sat in a command chamber as senior officers reviewed projections. Not invasion scenarios. Those had always existed. These were structural models, stress tolerances, failure cascades. They spoke calmly, professionally. No one said collapse. They said redistribution. No one said breach. They said realignment. Cadia had a language for everything, even the unthinkable, song tightening its tempo. Tech priests recorded the changes with solemn reverence. Incense thickened the air. Binary prayers murmured without interruption. The machines were not failing. They were adapting. Adaptation implies response, and response implies stimulus, synchronized, not identical, but aligned. People dreamed of standing on walls, watching tides pull back, of counting heartbeats, of doors holding under pressure. They woke calm, focused. Cadia did not dream of defeat. It dreamed of holding longer. The eye of terror shift. Warp storms arranged themselves into corridors, patterns that navigators had only theorized, never observed. The gate narrowed, not closing, condensing, as if something immense were preparing to pass through, a space too small for haste. I heard the name spoken quietly. Astropathic chambers. Abaddon, not with fear, with inevitability. The despoiler was no longer a recurring storm. He was a scheduled convergence. Cadia had faced him before, and had held. That history was comforting, and orders went out to reinforce void platforms. Orbital defense grids recalibrated. Fleet elements repositioned closer to the gate. All described as precautionary. Cadia was very good at precaution. The planet had been a precaution for 10,000 years. I walked among the regiments as they drilled. The cadence was unchanged. Boots struck stone with perfect rhythm. Yet I sensed a difference. The soldiers were no longer drilling against an abstract threat. They were drilling for something specific, unspoken, but understood. Muscle memory sharpened. Eyes focused a fraction longer on firing lines. This was not fear. It was clarity. In the civilian districts, life remained ordered. Yet small rituals appeared. Families ate together more often. Letters were written and rewritten. Keepsakes polished. Not in mourning. In council met beneath the highest spire. Access restricted. Records sealed. They reviewed contingency Omega, then Theta, then contingencies without names. Plans that assumed failure without admitting it. This was not defeatism, it was responsibility. Cadia did not deny possibility, compartmentalized it. The pylons emitted a resonance that traveled through bedrock and bone alike. A planetary hum felt more than heard. People paused mid-step, hands resting briefly against walls, as if acknowledging a familiar presence. The hum passed, and life continued, acknowledged. The lock had tested itself. I felt the weight of memory press, heavier than, not sorrow, responsibility. If Cadia were to fall, it must be remembered correctly, not as failure, but as function fulfilled. That truth would matter in the long centuries that arrive more frequently. Messages fragmented at the edges, words intact, meanings strained. Some spoke of fleets assembling beyond perception, others of silence where voices once answered. High Command acknowledged them calmly, increased readiness, issued no panic. Even now, a young officer asked an older one a question during a quiet watch. "Do you think this will be the one?" The older officer did not answer immediately. He watched the eye pulse softly on the horizon. Then he said, "If it is, then we hold anyway." That was the Cadia answer, always had been. As the days passed, the sense of compression intensified. Time itself felt denser, moments more deliberate. Cadia was approaching a point of decision, even if no decision would be spoken. The planet stood at the edge of its purpose. As you drift deeper now, let the weight ease from your shoulders. You are not asked to decide, only to witness. This was the moment when inevitability gained shape, when preparation reached its highest form. Cadia still stood, strong, exact, unyielding, and somewhere beyond the gate, a warlord sharpened his intent. But the first rest here, in the breath, before history inhales. Hush now, stay with the quiet. The vigil deepens. The first blow rarely announces itself as catastrophe. It arrives disguised as confirmation. Cadia had long expected the storm. So when the void finally stirred, there was no shock. Auspec's arrays began returning echoes that refused to resolve into absence. Shapes too deliberate to be debris, too coordinated to be coincidence. Contacts appeared, faded, reappeared closer. The eye of terror exhaled, fleet the moment all simulations curved toward. Defense grids shifted from monitoring to engagement readiness. Weapon spirits awakened from disciplined slumber. Void shields thickened their harmonic layering. The machines understood they always had. Cadia was not surprised by war. War was its natural environment. The first ships emerged, like thoughts becoming words, heavy silhouettes tearing free from immaterial shadow, ancient hulls scarred by centuries of defiance, spines crowned with blasphemous sigils, batteries warm with anticipation. Trader fleets did not arrive in disarranged, purposeful, patient. This was not a raid, not a probing strike. This was commitment. Orbital command broadcast activation codes. Planet-wide. A single phrase carried through encrypted channels. Stand to full watch. Cadia obeyed as one organism, from fortress bastions to subterranean redoubts, from civilian shelters to high-altitude platforms. Every system shifted into its true role. The world did not tremble. It aligned. Void combat began at distances, measured in light, seconds. Lances stitched cold inevitability. Ships vanished in sudden silence, not exploding, simply ceasing to be. The void does not scream, it absorbs. Cadia watched calmly, recording losses, adjusting trajectories. The planet did not grieve ships. It accounted no speeches, no last, minute inspiration. Cadia's inspiration had been delivered at birth. Hands checked weapons by feel alone. Breaths slowed. Postures locked into trained stillness. This was not the first battle of their lives. It was simply the most honest. The first orbital platforms fell after hours of sustained exchange. Overwhelmed, outflanked, sacrificed deliberately to thin incoming vectors. Their destruction was recorded without hesitation. Every loss purchased time. Every wreck altered approach lanes. Cadia traded material for geometry, and geometry was sky changed color. Not dramatically, gradually. A bruised hue crept across the upper atmosphere. As warp energies brushed reality, children in shelters noticed it first. They asked quiet questions. The answers were steady, measured. The sky has always done this. Yet, the pylons responded again. Their resonance deepened, stabilizing stress fractures in the veil between worlds. Tech priests chanted longer cycles, voices roughened by devotion. The pylons were not shields. They were anchors, holding reality in place by strained. Trader vessels closed, the distance relentlessly, accepting losses without hesitation. This was not a fleet seeking victory by attrition. It was a fleet seeking arrival. Boarding torpedoes launched in disciplined waves. Atmospheric craft screamed through firestorms. Not fall. Cadia's defenses layered denial upon denial. Still, some reached the surface. The first landings were met by pre-registered fire. Kill zones decades in the making. Chaos troops emerged into storms of disciplined destruction. Cadia did not believe in perfect defense, only sufficient resistance. I moved through a command bunker as casualty tallies updated. Numbers climbed steadily, without spike, without collapse. This was controlled loss. Commanders spoke in clipped tones. Requests, reinforcements would arrive. They asked how long they could delay. Cadia measured success in hours, not survival. The enemy pushed harder as resistance clarified. Massed assaults, warp, saturated weapons tearing wounds in stone and air. Fortresses shuddered, but remained. Each walls, each corridor collapsed into kill funnels. Cadia unfolded its defenses, like a book written in blood and foresight. There were moments rare, when fear flickered, a soldier pausing too long before advancing, a hand tightening unnecessarily on a trigger, and then training reclaimed them, was acknowledged and set aside. Cadia allowed fear. It simply did not allow paralysis. As the hours stretched into days, the scale of the assault became undeniable. This was not a breaking attempt. It was an unmaking. The enemy was willing to lose fleets, gate, and Cadia stood directly in the way. As you drift deeper now, let the thunder soften. Let the fire blur into warmth. This was the opening movement, the overture to a catastrophe still forming its voice. Cadia had not yet reached its limit, but it could sense it. Purpose nears completion. Rest here, in the midst of held lines and unbroken walls, before the true cost reveals itself. Hush now, remain with the stillness. The vigil does not break. By the 9th turning of the siege clocks, time itself seemed to thin. Cadia no longer measured days by the sun. The sky had become unreliable, bruised by distant fires, stained by energies that did not belong to it, counted in heartbeats between alarms, in the rhythm of reload cycles, in the steady breath of soldiers who had not yet been asked to die. The enemy adapted, as all ancient foes do. Assault patterns shifted from force to insinuation, from massed pressure to patient corrosion. Whispers crept. Warp echoes bled into vox traffic, subtle distortions that mimicked familiar voices. Orders that arrived half a second too late, coordinates off by a single digit, small errors accumulating. Cadia noticed countermeasures deployed without panic. Vox protocols replaced machine channels. Messengers ran through fire, lit corridors, boots striking stone in practiced cadence. The Imperium reverted to flesh and faith, as it always does when machines begin to dream. I watched officers trace lines across tactical slates again. The map never stayed still beneath the surface. The buried vaults stirred. Long sealed chambers vibrated with sympathetic resonance, as if something ancient within Cadia responded to the strain above. I was not authorized to descend that deep, felt more than heard, like the echo of a thought thinking itself. The pylons were singing. On the surface, civilian shelters endured. Families sat beneath lumen, globes dimmed to conserve power. Children traced regimental sigils into dust. Elders recited duty. No hysteria, no collapse. Cadia had prepared even its fear. I spoke with a woman who had never held a weapon, yet could recite fortress evacuation protocols from memory. She smiled softly. We have always known this might come. The enemy landed deeper now, closer to population centers. Accident, by intent. They sought not merely territory, but fracture. Saboteurs emerged from places long thought secure. Sleeper cults shedding years of silence in a single night. Not many, but enough. Enough to security forces moved without hesitation. Corridors sealed. Access codes revoked. There was sorrow, but no debate. Cadia could not afford mercy shaped like doubt. The traitors were removed quietly, their absence folded into the rhythm of the defense. War leaves no room for explanations. A void battle reached a new equilibrium. Imperial fleets bled, but held. Enemy vessels clustered unnaturally close, sheltering behind overlapping fields of corrupted physics. The eye of terror pulsed, as if watching, as if amused. Astropaths screamed comprehension. They had glimpsed something too large to name. Within command, the tone shifted. Still calm, still disciplined, but heavier. Projections no longer asked if Cadia could hold indefinitely. Encrypted and transmitted. Cultural memory prioritized alongside military intelligence. Cadia began to choose what it would save. A planet preparing to be remembered. I wandered the ramparts during a lull. The wind carried ash like slow snow, settling gently on armor, stone. Soldiers stood in long lines, silhouetted against distant fires. They did not speak. There was nothing left to clarify. Each knew their place, and that knowledge was peace. Then, a tremor, not from bombardment, not from impact, threading through their ancient harmony. Tech priests froze mid-chant. Data streams spiked with impossible readings. Reality flexed. Just enough. Cadia felt it like a held breath breaking. The enemy reacted instantly, as if they had been waiting for this exact flaw. Pressure intensive fronts, simultaneous assaults, stretching defenses thin. This was no coincidence. The weakness had been anticipated, mapped, exploited. Whatever secret Cadia had carried, the enemy knew it too. Still, Cadia did not break. Lines bent, adjusted. A bastion communication faltered, but intent remained clear. Hold, as long as possible. The word echoed without being spoken. As exhaustion settled into bones, as the sky burned ever brighter, I sensed the shift, not defeat, not yet. Prevent the end. It was fighting to define it, and that distinction matters. Rest here now, in the narrowing space between endurance and revelation. Let the sound soften, the distant thunder become oceanic. The alarms fade into memory. You are safe, for this universe leans closer. Hush now, do not stir, weary soul. The vigil continues. By the 10th day of sustained engagement, Cadia had settled into a rhythm. Not complacency, not confidence. Corridors, each step measured, each breath deliberate. Even the wind seemed to respect their pace, rustling lightly across battered parapets, carrying the scent of ash and ionized air. Above, the trader fleets continued their patient advance. Not chaotic, not impulse, every movement deliberate. They had learned. Or perhaps they had been taught by the eye itself. To Cadia, this was nothing new. Still, it unsettled the mind in subtle ways. I walked through the ruined outer districts, where incoming fire had forced civilians worked silently to salvage what they could. No tears, no cries. Cadia had trained them in endurance. In calm, in the sanctity of routine, they moved like echoes of the disciplined regiments above, unbroken in form. Even when part the world aspires, senior officers reviewed the data. The projections were no longer theoretical. They reflected reality, a reality darker than any simulation. Yet, not despair. Cadia did not despair. Plans were amended, redoubts reinforced, supply chains rerouted. Everything else would be faced when necessary. In the barracks, soldiers whispered quietly, not fear, not doubt, only recollections, shared memories of training, of camaraderie, of victories long past. These whispers became anchors. Silent reinforcement relied on understanding. The pylons pulsed more sharply now, their hum threading through the entire planet. Every foundation, every wall, every spire vibrated, synchronizing with the energy beneath. The resonance was constant, almost soothing, stretched ever thinner. Boarding actions escalated. Enemy forces sought to breach the last few operational fortresses. Still, Cadia responded. Every corridor prepared in advance. Every trap laid in meticulous order. Chaos troops met calculated devastation. Yet, formed. The enemy was relentless, patience embodied in flesh and metal within the council chambers. The leaders conferred quietly. Maps displayed losses, projected exhaustion, strain on the pylons. Each plan accounted for contingencies, even those that no one dared speak aloud. Victory, they knew, was no longer a promise. It was definition. How long could Cadia hold, and what would survive if it fell? I walked along the outer ramparts at night, the fires of distant orbital battles, painting the clouds in muted oranges and reds. Soldiers leaned on railings, eyes scanning, hand weapons. They were not afraid. They were attentive, absorbing the rhythm of the battle. And the rhythm spoke clearly. Persistence, precision, endurance. Cadia had always been a student of persistence, and now it was teaching the galaxy. Energy through the pylons. They recorded fluctuations, anomalies, responses to pressure from above. A quiet recognition passed among them. These were not failures. These were communications, a dialogue with reality itself. And Cadia listened. Above, the void grew heavy, expand, folding time subtly, stretching distance, distorting perception. Ships moved as if through molasses, yet every maneuver was precise. Astropaths spoke in hushed tones, whispers that the winds themselves could not carry. The enemy, a counterpoint. The first breaches into secondary fortresses were met with ritualized efficiency. No panic, no hesitation, only the repetition of drills refined over millennia. Chaos troops pressed. Cadia responded. Some were destroyed, others to its defense. Every action part of a larger rhythm. In civilian shelters, the hum of the pylons vibrated gently. Children had stopped asking questions. Parents whispered catechisms under their breath. Even here, Cadia's discipline permeated. A quiet order bore the sky. It was everywhere, even in the cadence of survival. I returned to the command spire, looking down on the city below. Bastions held, defenses shifted, and yet the strain was evident. Every wall bore it silently. Every soldier carried it in stone and steel. It was the sum of discipline, foresight, and endurance. But even the sum has limits. As the hours stretched into what might have been days, Cadia became something different. Not simply a fortress world. Not only a bastion, but a living testament to endurance, quiet courage of those who hold. And still, the enemy pressed, but Cadia held, not invincible, but unbroken. Rest. Now, let the cadence of boots, the hum of pylons, and the distant fires lull you deeper. Hushed separate regiments and command centers. It moved as a single organism, a pulse of metal, flesh, and faith. Every soldier, every civilian, every fortress aligned the rhythm of survival. Boots striking stone in a cadence older than memory. Weapons humming softly. Horizon. The enemy could see the discipline, but could not understand it. From orbit, the void battle raged. Heavy cruisers danced a deadly waltz with corrupted warp ships. macro cannons traced slow, inevitable arcs. Lances of light tore through blackness, absorbed. Deflectors flexed, pylons chanted silently from the bowels of the world, not to repel, but to endure. Within the city, quiet adjustments were being made, barricades reinforced, supply caches shifted, evacuation routes subtly realigned, followed the patterns it had practiced. Since birth, I observed the soldiers in the streets, their faces illuminated by faint braziers. They did not look at me. They looked past me, to the space where their purpose lay. Cadia was not waiting for a victory. It was waiting to fulfill its duty. In command chambers, tactical officers whispered numbers. Not panic, not despair, just the logistics of resistance, calculations of loss, projections of endurance. Every death accounted for, every sacrifice planned, every hour pylons thrummed more insistently, their resonance threading through stone and bone alike, a heartbeat underlying every step. I could feel it in my chest, a vibration that spoke of inevitability, of purpose, of time running not backward, but inward. Somewhere shifted, their sealed doors responding to the strain above, not sentience, but recognition. Cadia acknowledging its own limits. Boarding actions escalated again. Enemy troops poured into outer districts, yet every breach met precision. Fortresses funneled the attackers, artillery and plasma fire synchronized. The Incas Marines fell as the rhythm of Cadia's endurance. Unseen, unbroken, unstoppable, civilians moved silently through shadows. Children, guided by parents. Neighbors, guiding a single organism. Each heartbeat, each step, each breath, aligned. Not invulnerable, but unyielding. In the command spires, reports came faster. Losses calculated. Assaults logged. Reinforcements reallocated. Every small gap closed instantly. The enemy adjusted. Cadia adapted. Time became the battlefield. I descended to a lower chamber, one not used since the earliest days of Cadia's founding. The walls were etched with records of generations, every strategic shift, every failed incursion, every victory and retreat. The air smelled of ancient incense, dust drifting like ash in sunlight. I traced my fingers along the engravings, feeling the weight of centuries and the inevitability of the moment. Cadia was aware of its purpose, of its fragility, of its story yet to be told. The void but insistent, warp energy seeped closer. Shadows stretched unnaturally. Voices of astropaths strained. Some whispered of futures unnameable. Yet the world remained steady. Every fortress a testament. Every regiment a promise. In one of the outer districts, a soul, heavy eyes scanning the sky, I spoke softly. You are part of something greater. The walls do not tremble for you. You tremble for them, and that is enough. The soldier nodded and continued. Cadia did not need its people to understand. It only needed them to endure into one another. The cadence of battle became eternal. Every moment an echo of the last. every action mirrored by anticipation. The enemy pressed, Cadia held, and somewhere beyond comprehension, the eye of terror watched as the world rotated slowly under the shadowed skies. I understood truth. This was no longer a battle, no longer a siege. This was a testament, a meditation, a record etched in stone, blood, and memory. Cadia existed, not only to resist, but to teach endurance, to demonstrate as inevitability approaches, the sum of discipline and purpose is a story the galaxy cannot forget. Rest here. Let the cadence of boots, the hum of pylons, and the distant fires carry you deeper. You are safe. For now. For this moment, Hush had ceased to be merely a planet under siege. It had become an emblem, a pulse of life and discipline, a rhythm echoed in stone, in metal, and in blood. Every soldier, every officer, every civilian was folded into its heartbeat. Boots struck the stone with measured cadence, followed routines learned long ago. The air itself seemed to acknowledge order, yet beneath this perfection, tension rippled, subtle, almost imperceptible, like the shift of a thread beneath tapestry. Above, the void remained a dark mirror. Massed fleets of terror exhaled slowly, a subtle pulse in warp, space felt in bone and mind alike. Astropaths strained to sense the future, fingers trembling as visions flared, not screams of panic, but silent recognition. The weight of inevitability surface. I watched soldiers adjust lines, redistribute forces, seal corridors. Every action automatic, yet purposeful. Even when the enemy pressed into secondary fortresses, even when gaps appeared, Cadia adapted without faltering. It was a symphony of defense. Beneath the pylons, the resonance grew. A deep, omnipresent hum felt in the bones, in the marrow, in the rhythm of breath. The tech, priests traced the waves. Adjusting flow communicated with its own foundations, speaking in vibrations older than memory. Enemy boarding actions intensified. Groups of Chaos Marines and cultists attempted to slip through cracks. Every move anticipated, every path predicted. Yet, for every exhaustion, in fatigue, in the quiet tightening of discipline, Cadia did not panic. It did not despair. It only persisted. In civilian sectors, families huddled in low-lit shelters. Children traced sigils into dust. Parents whispered the rhythm of survival. Cadia's lessons etched into their bones. Even here, the planet held, as if it were a single being, within command spires. Officers monitored every detail, every casualty, every movement, every pulse of the enemy above. There was no fear, only quiet sorrow of knowing that each moment held consequences yet unseen. I walked the outer walls during a lull. Fires from distant orbital combat painted clouds in muted oranges. The wind carried ash like snow, settling gently on armor, on banners, on unyielding stone. Soldiers stood in perfect lines, faces serene, eyes scanning, hands resting lightly on weapons. They did not speak, they did not question. Cadia had trained them, and now they were perfect instruments of endurance. Within the deepest vaults, ancient chambers vibrated with the strain above, the pylons, the chambers, the city, all spoke in rhythm, a language of survival and inevitability. Even I could feel it. Cadia knew its own limits and its story. Boarding assaults continued. Each wave, met with quiet, was no longer fighting for victory. It fought to define its memory. Every action, every decision. Harrowton Dome, even as inevitability loomed, Cadia endured. Civilians continued without question. The planet itself had woven its defense into the daily motions of its people. Every breath, every movement, every heartbeat, part of the rhythm. I returned to the command spire, observing the defenses below, the pattern of survival. Yet, the strain, it was visible in the subtle tremor of walls, in the slower responses of some soldiers, in the deep hum of the pylons. Cadia was aware of what it faced, of what it might not survive. As the hours blurred into days, Cadia became a testament to duty, to endurance, to quiet courage in the face of inevitable fate. And the enemy pressed, and the planet endured. Rest now. Feel the cadence of boots, the hum of pylons, the distant fires carrying you deeper. Hush now. Remain with the quiet. The vigil thins. By the 13th measure of endurance, Cadia had entered a strange clarity. Not hope, not despair. Acceptance. The kind that settles when every path has been walked in the mind, when every outcome has been, because danger has passed, but because it has been understood. Cadia understood now. The sky above the fortress, cities had dimmed into a constant twilight. Not night, not day. A bruised, motionless half. Light, as if the world itself refused to turn away, glowed, steady, enduring. The void war had slowed, not from exhaustion, but from intention. The enemy was no longer testing. They were waiting within command sanctums. Data slate projections stabilized into grim symmetry. Loss curves flattened, not because sustainable resistance had been reached. Cadia had found its equilibrium, balanced perfectly between survival and collapse. This was the point no fortress world wished to reach, and yet Cadia had been born for it. I listened to officers speak quietly of continuity, of succession. Must outlive stone. Archives were sealed within deeper vaults, encoded redundancies, layered upon redundancies, not secrets of war alone, but of culture, of memory, of identity. Cadia was preparing to persist beyond itself. Were not repaired. Their damage was intentional, a visible record of endurance, a reminder that survival did not require perfection. Soldiers passed beneath them without looking up. They already knew what they represented in the shelters. Children slept more often now, exhaustion finally outweighing curiosity, parents watched them with quiet resolve, hands resting lightly on small shoulders, listening to the distant thunder, not praying for rescue, but for steadiness. Cadia did not ask the universe for mercy. It asked only for time. The pylons, they had deepened, lower, slower, no longer merely stabilizing, but bracing. Tech priests moved with deliberate care now, voices lowered, chants stretched longer. They understood what their instruments were telling them, even if they did not speak intended span. Cadia was leaning on ancient bones. Enemy landings decreased, not ceased, but focused. The enemy no longer sought to spread chaos across the surface. They selected points with precision, symbolic locations, structural nexuses, places of resonance. Cadia, and answering it, I witnessed a regiment redeployed from a fortress that still held to reinforce another that did not yet fall, a choice made without debate, without bitterness. Those left behind did not protest. They nodded, adjusted firing arc, not abandoned positions. It redistributed sacrifice. There were moments, rare, when the silence became heavy between bombardments, between alarms. In those moments, soldiers would look outward, not to the sky, but inward. Some remembered childhood drills, others, tears, no breakdowns, only remembrance and readiness. Astropathic choirs fell silent, one by one, not in screams, but in exhaustion. Those who remained spoke only in fragments, symbols, impressions. They described pressure, patient. Cadia did not need names for it. The feeling was enough. In the deepest vaults, where even command clearance trembled, ancient inscriptions pulsed faintly. Warnings, etched before the Imperium, understood what it guarded. Before history learned to forget, I was not permitted to read them. I felt their intent. They had always known this moment might come. The enemy fleets drew closer together, compressing their formation, not advancing, not retreating, waiting like breath held before a final word. Cadia responded instinctively. Defensive line whirled, leaned forward. I stood once more upon the walls, the wind carrying metallic dust, the sky unmoving. Below me, a planet that had never known peace, yet had perfected calm. Cadia had reached the point where effort no longer increased survival. Only can feel it too. Can you not? That narrowing of possibility, that quiet tightening of fate. Let your breath slow. Match mine. In and out. Cadia breathed this way now. Slow measured, unafraid. What comes next will not arrive. Consequence, as a truth long prepared for. Rest here, at the edge of revelation. When endurance becomes legacy, sleep, hush now, stand. That moment had arrived. The world no longer strained against the siege. It bore it, like stone bearing weight, like bone bearing age, like memory bearing truth. Cadia had become heavy with destiny. The sky no longer changed. It remained locked in its bruised twilight. Distant fire, unmoving as if the heavens themselves had chosen to stand at attention. Orbital detonations continued, but they felt distant now, muted. Not because they were weaker, but because Cadia had grown accustomed to their voice. Command transmissions shortened, not from failure certainty. Orders were no longer debated, only confirmed, hold, reinforce, delay, simple words, heavy with finality. There was no longer a question of winning, only of holding the line long enough for meaning to be forged. I walked the inner bastion, their colors muted by ash, their sigils scarred by heat. They were not replaced, not repaired. They were allowed to age. Cadia understood that symbols must sometimes suffer, so they can speak honestly. Soldiers slept in shifts now, not deeply, but enough. Helmets rest cradled, like old companions, even in rest. Their bodies remembered posture, readiness. Dreams were brief, fragmented, marching drills, firing sequences, voices of instructors long gone. Cadia trained even the unconscious low, solemn chant, felt through the soles of boots, through ribs, through the foundations of the cities. Tech priests spoke little now, hands resting against control plinths, as if comforting an ancient beast. They knew the truth, even if they did not name it. No longer stable, they were enduring, deep beneath the surface. Sealed vaults unlocked for the first time in centuries. Not for weapons, not for reinforcements, for records, memory, crystals, genealogies, doctrine codices, cultural testaments. Would remain a world preparing not for death, but for remembrance. The enemy sensed a shift. Their movements changed again, tightened, focused. They no longer wasted effort on distraction or terror. They pressed toward structural truths hidden beneath centuries of fortification. This was no longer war. It was excavation. They were digging for Cadia's spine. A fortress fell, not explosively, not gloriously, quietly. Its guns fell silent. Its Vox ceased transmission. Command logged the loss was recalculated. No cry of despair echoed across the world. Only adjustment. Cadia absorbed the loss, as it had absorbed all others. Civilians were moved deeper, not hurried, not panicked. Guided, hands held hands, footsteps echoed softly, pleading. Cadia's people had learned that silence could be strength. Even children understood now. They did not ask when it would end. They asked where they were needed. Astropathic silence spread. The choir chambers dimmed. Lights lowered. Crystal, a pressure too immense for words. Those few astropaths, still conscious, did not speak of visions. They spoke of weight, of something vast aligning itself. Patiently, Cadia felt that alignment in its bones. I returned once more to the highest wall. From there, I could see the distant glow of firestorms, the unmoving ceiling of war above. Below me, a planet that had never known peace, yet had perfected purpose. Cadia had given everything it could give, and still it stood. but standing had changed meaning. Beside me did not speak. They watched, not the enemy, but the world itself, listening, feeling, as one listens to an old structure under strain, recognizing the creak that signals endurance, and the one that signals truth. Cadia was speaking now. Next will not be loud, not sudden. It will be precise, deliberate. A decision long delayed, finally made. Cadia has reached the edge of what stone and discipline can bear. And yet, it does not retreat. It leans forward. Rest here, at the moment before the weight settle. Sleep. Hush now. Do not rise. The vigil completes its circle. There are endings that arrive like thunder, and there are endings that arrive like truth. Cadia's ending chose the latter. By the 15th measure of endurance, the world had reached stillness, not silent, so deep it felt ceremonial. Orders had shortened to gestures, gestures to presence, presence to intention. Cadia no longer asked what would happen. It listened. The pylon sang one final harmony, low, grave, ancient beyond length, delayed it, like old hands bracing a door they had sworn to hold, knowing the hinge would fail, but holding anyway. Tech, priests, knelt not in prayer, but in respect. They had done all that could be done. Above, the void changed texture, not movement, alignment, making space for something vast, something deliberate, something final. No alarm sounded. Cadia did not need warning. It knew. In the command sanctums, officers stood together, not around tables, but beside one another. Data screen calculate. One commander spoke softly, not an order, a truth. All lines hold. No one repeated it. It was already obeyed. On the walls, soldiers stood straighter. Helmets sealed, weapons checked, darkened further. Not from cloud, but from presence. A shadow eclipsed. The stars, slow, unavoidable. The world trembled, not in fear, in recognition. Stone flexed, foundations groaned. The pylons cried out, not in pain, crossed into legend. When holding became teaching, the planet's spine fractured, not explosively, but decisively, like an oath fulfilled. Cities cracked, bastions folded inward. Fire rose, not chaotically, but in solemn pillars. Even then, Cadia were thrown from walls, not screaming, not pleading. They fell with weapons still gripped, bodies aligned by training, even in descent. Civilians sheltered deeper. As ceilings cracked, as light failed, hands held hands. No one ran blindly, Cadia taught. He failed, not shattered, released. Their ancient purpose fulfilled, their task complete. Reality rushed inward. The warp exhaled, and Cadia finally began to die. I stood amid falling stone and drifting ash, and I understood. This was not defeat, had been answered by a universe that feared what it represented, a gate that said no. For 10,000 years, a world that proved discipline could wound gods. As the crust split, as fire and darkness met, I whispered the words that no record would keep. Remember them, and the galaxy, it remembers still. And so, the tale fades into the long night. The embers cool, the rain grows softer. Carry this sorrow gently into sleep. Tomorrow is another war, but tonight there is only quiet. Rest now, rest